been described as one of the most volatile moments in Indonesia in more than 20 years. Protests, furious clashes, alleged police brutality, riots, firebombing and looting.
Jadi ini sebenarnya ini bukan demo lagi, Pak. Ini kemarahan masyarakat karena kesewenang-wenangan petugas saja.
The return fire between riot police and protesters. Protesters are firing fireworks, whereas riot police are firing tear gas back at them.
Whipped into a frenzy by the death of a rideshare motorbike driver, run over by police during a protest, the rioting and ensuing crackdown has now killed at least 10. Police and military personnel are out on the streets in force.
Kepada pihak kepolisian dan TNI, saya perintahkan untuk mengambil tindakan yang setegas-tegasnya.
This is not a war. This is not a war. This is grievances of people crying for justice, crying for help.
It's brought Indonesia's rampant income inequality and anger at its government and security forces into sharp focus.
Gue mau nih para petinggi negara saat ini, ya, kalian yang menggunakan jas-jas keren kalian, yang menggunakan baju-baju fancy kalian, ya, temuin rakyat sekarang.
So how did protests over parliamentary entitlements and economic policy become a full-blown movement calling for systemic change in Indonesia? Protests began near Indonesia's parliament on a Monday in late August. Sparked by recent reporting of lavish allowances and perks for members of parliament, many times more than the minimum wage, which Indonesians found deeply insensitive. Riot police were called in, firing tear gas and arresting hundreds. Later that week, protesters came back, but clashes with police spiralled out of control. Brimob, a police unit used in counter-terrorism and counterinsurgency, used tear gas and shields to try and drive the crowd away from Parliament. That night, an armoured police vehicle drove at protesters, and young rideshare motorbike driver Afan Kurniawan, who was caught up in the chaos, fell from his bike and was run over. Video of his death went viral over social media, symbolising police brutality and stoking deep-held anger over Indonesia's security forces. In the coming days, protests had spread across the country in Yogyakarta, Central Java, Bali, Borneo, Sumatra and Sulawesi. In Jakarta and beyond, police and government buildings were set on fire, including a provincial government office in Makassar, South Sulawesi, that killed 3 people. Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto said the actions of some were treason and terrorism, but protesters blame the violence on provocateurs. Late on Sunday, President Subianto changed his plans around a trip to China to deal with the unrest. He called for calm and promised a firm police crackdown on the destruction of buildings. In the following week, police and military take to the streets, particularly in the capital in droves. Some scattered protests continue, but many are fearful of security forces. Student protesters, civil society organisations and labour groups issue a series of demands to Parliament. So what do they want, and what's driving them to this point? Broadly, the underlying issues at play here can fit into 3 categories: democracy, the economy and security forces. Let's start with security. The nationwide police response to these protests has been immense. At the centre of it is Brimob, Indonesia's police paramilitary force that's received considerable resources in recent years. It's a unit usually used in counterinsurgency and counter-terrorism, and it's been responding to protests and demonstrations with tear gas, batons and shields, and they've arrested many hundreds of people. They've also been authorised to use rubber bullets near government buildings. At least 10 people have been killed during the week of protests, 3 of them students, and a police investigation into the death of a 21-year-old in Yogyakarta has begun. The actions of police have raised many questions among Indonesian human rights groups. Even the UN's Human Rights Office has called for transparent investigations into alleged violations of international human rights law. The police response to protests, in particular the death of Afan Kurniawan, has reinforced a common view in Indonesia that they're there to protect the interests of elites and not the people. And rights groups are concerned President Subianto's strong language around the protests has legitimised the actions of police.
It's dangerous for the head of states, the head of government, labeling peaceful protesters as anarchists, terrorists, and treasonous. I think these three labels will just make things worse and are just intended to justify police brutality, military violence across Indonesia.
Indonesia's economy and government economic policies are also a key driver of public anger, especially among the younger population. Indonesia's official figures put more than 23 million people below the poverty line. That's just a few million people shy of Australia's entire population. Millions of young people are unemployed, particularly for those aged between 15 and 29 years old. Income inequality is rampant and climbing. Also, to fund big-ticket items and election promises, President Prabowo Subianto has slashed the national budget, impacting many. So it's no wonder that any increase in perk, allowance or salary for members of parliament comes across as insensitive and triggers public outrage.
Secara ekonomi tentu itu, apalagi di bulan ini kita tahu pemerintah menaikkan beras ya, dan menaikkan pajak, menaikkan gaji DPR.
Ya karena satu ekonomi sih, kan ekonomi saat ini benar-benar udah 2 tahun kebelakangan ini ya.
The specific allowance for members of the national legislature that upset many Indonesians was a housing allowance of more than $4,500. That's about 10 times the minimum wage in Jakarta. But there's more. Rice allowances, child allowances, communication allowances. This comes on top of their base salaries. Local media has reported that some legislators can earn an equivalent to the base salary of an Australian MP. Since the protests, the government has decided to end some of those entitlements, but the harsh economic realities remain, as well as the perception of the government as out of touch. Many feel that Indonesia's democracy is again under threat. President Prabowo Subianto is a former military commander who was dismissed after Indonesia's riots in 1998 and was implicated in the forced kidnappings and disappearances of activists. Since becoming president, he's made increasing moves to allow armed forces personnel to hold more roles within government departments. In addition to security reform, police accountability and the release of arrested protesters, a cross-section of Indonesian groups is calling for democratic reforms. This has generally been led by student groups, often seen as a key driving force in Indonesia's democracy, as well as civil society organisations. Young unemployed and young workers, as well as motorcycle rideshare drivers, have all been involved in the protests, all representing their own key interests. They've rallied around a cry of 17+8, a series of demands that's been issued to Indonesia's parliament. It's a delicate time in Indonesia as calls for reforms spread. And whether there'll be a return to any unrest isn't clear, with many groups calling for peaceful activism, dismayed by the violence that's taken place. There's everything at stake here, and how Indonesia's government and its people handle this moment could be key to shaping its democracy.